It shall so reflect. I recognize the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Neguse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Mr. Cook. I wanted to direct a few questions to you and wanted to talk a little bit about the App Store and app development. So just taking a step back, my understanding from your testimony today is that essentially Apple has to operate by the same rules that the app developers operate by in terms of being able to access the App Store. Is that correct?
We have 60 apps on the App Store. They go through the same rules that the 1.7 million do.
Okay, so here's kind of why I asked that question. My understanding is the App Store review guidelines tell app developers not to submit copycat apps. Is that correct?
I'm not totally familiar, but I believe that's the case because we were getting a number of apps that were essentially the same thing, a sort of a cookie cutter.
And I can represent to you, Mr. Cook, we've reviewed, our subcommittee staff has obviously reviewed the guidelines, and they say that app developers should have original ideas, that copycat ideas aren't fair, and Apple's customers don't want those. On the other hand, the app developer agreement, which you require every developer to agree to, does give Apple the right to copy other apps. And so the question is why one rule for the developers that compete with you and the opposite rule for Apple?
Congressman, I'm not familiar with that, but I could follow up with your office on it.
Well, I would appreciate if you could follow up with our office. My understanding, again, is that the app developer agreement explicitly says that Apple can use any information that an app developer provides to Apple for any person, or any purpose. And so obviously you have complaints from any number of app developers who have testified before our committee. As I said, represent the state of Colorado. We heard from a company called Tile, which said that Apple had access to confidential information about the apps distributed by the App Store. And given that, juxtaposed against this language in the exclusive agreement, you can understand why we would have concerns about anti-competitive conduct.
Yeah, Congressman, we run the App Store to help developers, not hurt them. We respect innovation. It's what our company is built on. We would never steal somebody's IP. But I will follow up with your office on more detail on this.
Well, and I appreciate that, Mr. Cook, because I think to the extent that Apple were willing to commit, and I intend to ask Mr. Pichai similar line of questioning, because I believe this is consistent across multiple different platforms, to the extent Apple was willing to commit within the developer agreement to say that while you have access to that data, that you are not going to use that data and are not permitted to use that data to replicate your own app, a copycat app, if you will, that would certainly, in my view, be a reflection of a step away from any type of anti-competitive conduct. And it sounds like you'll follow up and we can learn more with respect to that issue. Mr. Pichai, similarly, there was an article just today, or excuse me, yesterday, from The Verge. The title is "Google Reportedly Keeps Tabs on Usage of Rival Android Apps to Develop Competitors." And I'll quote from the article, Google said that the data doesn't give information about how people behave while they're using individual apps, but it wouldn't say whether it had been used to develop competing apps. So I guess first, I take it you would confirm that Google does have access to confidential information or ultimately competitively sensitive information about apps on the Android devices?
Congressman, if I could clarify this. Today, we have an API which is available for other developers as long as users consent. This gives us system health metrics. This is how we can launch digital well-being features on Android. This is how we understand which apps are using battery, and we can give a dashboard which shows, maybe for crashing or quality control or for battery usage or for digital well-being. So at a high level, this data is available through a public API, and other developers can avail as long as the users give consent to it.
So, Mr. Pichai, I just want to clarify, again, I'll quote from this article. The article refers to this data as sensitive data about other apps, including how often they're opened and for how long they're used. I'm not asking how you use that information. I'm just asking whether or not, in fact, what the article alleges it is correct, that you do have access to that data.
Yeah, with user consent and the APIs exist, yes, we do.
And does Google use
and it's
that?
critical for us to have access to that so that we can maintain the this is how we understand and we can, improve resource usage of applications.
Understood.
We can have features like.
My time's limited, sorry. I just want to get to this core question. Given that Google does have access to that data, does Google use that data to develop competing apps? And if your answer is no, will Google commit to making the necessary changes within its Android developer app agreements to ensure that developers have that sense of clarity, that in fact the data will not be used for Google to be able to develop a competing application?
Congressman, like other businesses today, we do look at trends, and we, in fact, in Play Store, we do publish the number of installs of application, and we give ranges. And so there's a wide variety of way by which we try to understand what's happening in the market. But I appreciate your concern about making sure there's clarity in this area, and we'll continue to invest and give more clarity.
Yeah, I guess, want to just follow very quickly, Mr. Chairman, if you're willing. So I guess I'm wondering if you can just answer that fundamental question. Does Google use that information to develop competing apps? I understand the purposes you've described in terms of how you use the information. I'm just asking if one of those, in fact, is to develop competing apps.
The gentleman's time has expired, but the witness may answer the question.
Congressman, because we try to understand what's going on in market and we are aware of popularity of apps, I don't want to. I want to be accurate in my answer, but in general, the primary use for that data is to improve the health of Android. But and any data we get, we have user consent for it, and we make it available through an API to other developers as well.
The gentleman's time has expired.